8:22. Football at 4 is powered by the Inside the Birds podcast. It's brought to you by Lyle and Back. From everything from skincare to cosmetic surgery, go to ilovelyle.back.com or call 856-MAKEOVER for Dr. Lyle and Back, proud sponsor of Football at 4. Well, Football at 4 is in the 5 o'clock hour because Jeffrey Lurie just spoke for 45 minutes after the team had decided to part ways with Doug Pederson. So let's bring in Geoff Mosher from the Inside the Birds podcast. They have an emergency pod that they already recorded, and you can hear their thoughts on the Inside the Birds podcast. But let's bring Moshe in now and get reaction now that we've heard from Jeffrey Lurie. So, Moshe, let's start with when you heard that Lurie was flying to Florida, what was your thought? Was your thought that Doug Pederson would not be the coach of the Philadelphia Eagles after that meeting?
My thought was that Doug was going there knowing that what he and Jeffrey discussed in the first meeting did not sit well with Jeffrey, which is why it required a follow-up meeting the following week. And, without knowing what Doug was going to do or going to say, I was starting to get a vibe that Doug was not going to have changed his vision all that much and was going to remain loyal to coaches and staff members that he felt would be part of fixing the problem, as Doug said he wanted to be there to do, but it was going to be the same people who, quote unquote, have been part of the problem this past year. And I was starting to get the feeling that if he was going to be loyal to those guys, that Jeffrey Lurie was going to have to feel the compulsion to move on.
So a lot of people wonder, did Jeffrey Lurie fire Pederson? My feeling is, Moshe, that Pederson just simply didn't want to be here anymore, told him, I can't acquiesce to that, and I think it's best if we part ways. How did you think this went down?
Yeah, I think that's probably a fair characterization of it. If Doug went to Florida knowing that he wasn't really going to recommend anything radically different than first time around, I'm sure that Doug knew what the outcome would be. And so if he didn't really change anything, then he was basically willing to take the L here and get fired. And he has a very good agent, Bob Lamont, who represents some of the league's, best head coaches, best coordinators, best executives. He represents almost all of the Andy Reid coaching tree. So, I'm sure Doug and Bob have been having discussions over the last few days. And you even heard Jeffrey Lurie mention that he wouldn't be surprised if Doug had a job, by the end of next week or something, I think is what Jeffrey said.
By the end of this week.
This week, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely, which I wouldn't be shocked either. So you mentioned Jeffrey Lurie just speaking. What stood out to you the most out of everything he said? I know he did a lot of dancing around, but was there anything that maybe raised your eyebrows a bit?
Well, he really did echo the same sentiment that Howie echoed in the press conference last Monday about short-term thinking, trying to bring the band back together, trying very hard after winning the Super Bowl to do whatever it took to continue to win another Super Bowl. And we've had this discussion before. They certainly looked going into 2018 and even 19 like a really good team on paper going into the year. And you thought that they were going to be competitive there. But, I've heard Howie and I've heard Jeffrey talk about the importance of long-term sustained success way too much in the past to let them get by with this excuse that all of a sudden it was okay to be a short-term thinking organization. That has never come out of their mouths up until the last year or two. So to me, it just sounds like Jeffrey always supported Howie's plans, and so Jeffrey's going to support him now. Now that the season's over, even throughout the turmoil. But Jeffrey did not have belief that Doug Pederson had a good plan himself for fixing the coaching staff and making the decisions that's going to be best for the team going forward.
Obviously, Geoff, many of the fans, when you ask them what's the biggest problem, their answer is Howie Roseman. Jeff Lurie obviously does not agree, and not only does he not agree, he believes it's the strength of the team, is that they have this decision-making team that is filled with potential general manager candidates. He stopped short of saying it's a GM factory, but it sounds as if Jeffrey Lurie It sounds as
He
if
really did, didn't he?
Yeah. Although he did throw Alshon under the bus for dropping that pass. Boy, he did. But he essentially doesn't believe that Roseman has any fault. In fact, he goes back to, look, I've been here for however many years, and we've been one of the most successful franchises, and he's one of the constants.
Yeah, so he made a very, I guess, odd or amorphous kind of remark about the draft, and if you have, they need to evaluate whether they're either not picking the right guys or whether too many guys that they do evaluate go off the board in front of them. And so he seemed to criticize very loosely their draft maybe approach or process a little bit, but then immediately look at it in the bigger picture and talk about all the success that they've had and talk about the draft picks that they have hit on. And as you mentioned, he went in and to talk about how Andrew Berry and Joe Douglas, their last two high-ranking executives, have gotten GM jobs and how they have future GMs in the building and that they really do believe their process. I think he mentioned that he would match his team's record and of success in making the playoffs over the long term for the last maybe like 5, 6, 7 years or with anybody. And he's right in that regard. But I think it's also fair, as we are doing, and saying, look, like this organization seems to have every 3 or 4 years a colossal breakdown that winds up in either a power struggle or a complete lack of symmetry between the head coach and the owner or the head coach and the GM. And you're at the top, but 3 years later, you're completely at the bottom. And I think that's just as fair to mention that organizations that go through adversity like the Steelers or the Ravens or the Packers or, Seattle don't seem to have these just completely rock bottom type years that force you to almost fire everybody or reset what you're doing. But the Eagles have had that. And I think that's important to note that they seem to have much worse reaction to adversity than other stable organizations do.
Is this a sexy job opening? Look, they run Doug out of town 3 years after the Super Bowl, the cap space turmoil, not having a lot of say if you're the head coach. But I always like to think, with all that being in the mix, the logo speaks for itself.
Hunter, it's such a great question. Doug Pederson winning the Super Bowl really kind of screwed up the conventional wisdom that went with his franchise. Because if you remember in 2016, it was not considered to be a very attractive opening. And Doug Pederson wasn't considered an attractive hire. Adam Gase decided to sign quickly with the Miami Dolphins, and Ben McAdoo went and took the Giants job, and Doug Pederson gets hired, and it seemed like it validated that people thought around the league that the Eagles having to go to Doug Pederson just showed you that they were not an attractive organization. But a year later or 2 years later, it wasn't even a thought because Doug had won the Super Bowl, and then he's going back to the playoffs the next 2 years. But I do think they're in the same situation. They don't have a great cap situation. They have an unsettled quarterback situation that's very murky right now and didn't get any clearer after that press conference. They've got a GM who's been in place and has had to endure power struggles. And they have an owner who's very, very involved, and despite what he said, and into analytics. So, with that set of criteria right there, how many coaches who have options, how many good head coaching candidates are going to look at the Eagles and think that that's the best job available? And so it may be that the team has to go out and find its own version of a Doug Pederson, someone willing to come in and work under these conditions. And you have to hope that this guy can win like Doug did and also keep his job longer than Doug did.
What did you make of what Wentz's future might be? I mean, did it sound like a guy who was 100% behind he's our guy? Did you read that they chose Carson Wentz over Doug Pederson at all?
I know that that's a popular theory. I don't know whether I believe it because I just didn't hear this really strong announcement from Jeffrey Lurie that Carson's coming back and that every move that they're going to be making from here on out with their coaching hires are dedicated to fixing Carson and making him great again. I mean, he did say he felt Carson was elite. He did say he thinks that there have been plenty of elite quarterbacks who've had bad years. Did say, he expects Carson to become a good quarterback again. But he also said he thought he had two potentially great quarterbacks in Carson and Jalen Hurts. And then he also said that he doesn't think an owner should be the one making that decision. So he certainly gave out mixed messages and left the door open for pretty much any scenario to happen.
Is there someone out there that you think would work best here in Philadelphia?
It's a great question, man. I mean, like I just brought up, you're going to have to understand that, like take Matt Rule. Matt Rule got paid $1 billion by the Panthers. And, less than a year into his hiring, I believe they've already fired the GM, Marty Herney, and they're bringing in someone new because that's the kind of power Matt Rule has when they sign him to all that money. You're not coming to the Philadelphia Eagles and having a power grab. You're not going to be determining who the GM is going to be. A lot of head coaches like to be aligned with the GM, but that's not going to happen here. And again, you're going to have to adhere to some of the things that this franchise really leans heavily on, analytics being one of them. And then you're going to have to come into a situation with the quarterback being unsettled. So who I don't know. Mike Kafka's name is out there. We'll see. I mean, he might be the type of guy because he's not such a hot candidate and he hasn't been an offensive coordinator yet. You don't hear of him like you hear of Brian Dable and Arthur Smith. So maybe, and he's only 34. If this is his best and only shot for a while, that he'll take it. But I don't think you're going to see the most strongest of personality guys running to take this job. They may have to look to the college ranks.
Some people believe that the Eagles did this or were okay with this because they already had somebody in mind. Does that seem to be does that seem to be something that's a possibility? Is that Jeffrey got to a point where he said, there's someone I'm interested in. I can't let him pass. Sorry.
Yeah, I don't know that they made this move because they have the grass is greener, someone on the other side. I really do think they wanted Doug to impress them with a better vision so that they can hold on to Doug. However, they're not stupid either. Knowing Howie and knowing Jeffrey the way I do and how they operate, I'm absolutely sure that they've got feelers out there, all out there. And so that's why it shouldn't surprise you that 5 seconds after Doug is fired, you're already seeing guys like Mike Kafka's name came up, and I don't remember who else was out there. I have said this, and I just expect that there to be some buzz around Lincoln Riley from Oklahoma and the Eagles. There'll be some buzz there, and so we'll have to see going forward. I mean, a guy like that's going to want a lot of money. And I think a couple of candidates that might come up on the radar are going to want a lot of money, especially if they know that they don't have the kind of power that some head coaches are given when they're hired.
Did you think that it was interesting? Lurie mentioned the defensive side of the football as a possibility. I always thought it was automatic it would be the offensive side.
Well, I think that's a good thing. I mean, I think he should very wide net. He should interview everybody. He said Deuce Staley would probably get a look at head coach as well. So, everything that Jeffrey says shouldn't be taken for a complete 100% gospel. You guys know that. So I think he knows that the reputation is that he's always looking for an offensive mind and can only be wowed by someone on offense. And I don't know if that's 100% true. I think maybe he could be wowed by somebody on the defensive side of the ball. So he leaves that door open. But my heart of hearts tells me he's going to be looking for someone on the offensive side of the ball.
Yeah. Sports Bash Live, 97.3 ESPN Football at 4. Geoff Mosher looking back at the Lurie presser, and obviously Doug Pederson is no longer the head coach of the Philadelphia Eagles. Like the mixed messaging that these two teams had, it seems like Doug was in a win now mode, and Jeffrey Lurie kind of said, well, hold on. Doug wanted his coaches. Lurie was like, that doesn't sound so great to me. I mean, like in this grand scheme of things, like Doug Pederson is like, I think we all agree and kind of said this at the beginning, Doug Pederson just seemingly did not want to be the coach here any longer. But I guess the question I have is Doug Pederson, like Sal said earlier when he was with us, that he thought the Eagles made a mistake. They kind of made a knee-jerk reaction. Isn't like letting Doug go kind of against everything that Lurie wants to be? Like he wants to be that stable organization. New Orleans had those 7-9 seasons, but they didn't. There were some rumors they were going to trade Peyton, but they never did. They haven't fired the coach in Pittsburgh, obviously, ever. Seattle.
Right.
Lurie, it seems that Lurie, like, he wants to be these others, but there's something holding him back from getting there.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's fair. I think he's talked about priding himself on patience. I think it's interesting that he said that their short-term thinking over the last few years kind of got them to this point and that they need to change it, but that Doug Pederson's short-term thinking about wanting to keep several of this staff in place to help fix the quarterback is not acceptable. So, and it's okay when it's Howie and Doug, but it's not. I'm sorry, it's okay when it's Jeffrey and Howie, but it's not okay when it's Doug. I think that's certainly a mixed message, and I Jeffrey has to take a look in the mirror here and wonder and look and see what kind of owner he wants to be. Changing coaches every 3 years or 3 to 5 years is not exactly a model of consistency or stability. So yeah, I agree with you on that. It's a little hypocritical.
Yeah, it is. I'm a little surprised that and another thing is too, Jeffrey, he hired Ray Rhodes. It didn't go well, but he did find Andy Reid. He took a chance on Chip Kelly. Doug Pederson was not pursued by anybody. He has this job because of his relationship with Andy, or he had this job based on his relationship with Andy Reid. So my question, I guess, is, do we feel confident that the Eagles will find the right guy, and that, in other words, is Jeffrey Lurie and Howie Roseman the right guy to say, look, if you're going to move on from your coach, at least you have a guy, you have confidence in this group at picking a coach?
Yeah, that's a good question. I guess it depends on how do you feel about them picking Pederson? He won a Super Bowl, but he got fired 3 years after. So does that make that a good hire or a bad hire? I think you can look at it from a lot of different angles and try to figure that one out. And look, sometimes people associate reporters' reports with how they feel. Adam and I have been very adamant that we've been told, and we believe it, that Doug did not do a very good job of coaching his coaches, nor did he do a great job of knowing the coaching landscape and being able to hire guys who are really good coaches. I mean, the fact that we've had 4 coaches in 5 years confirms that. But certainly I'll leave open the door. What if Doug Pederson goes and takes out of the Chargers job, brings Press Taylor with him, makes Press Taylor the OC, and behind Jeff Herbert, those guys win, go deep in the playoffs, maybe win a Super Bowl, then all of a sudden Jeffrey Lurie is going to look pretty bad. And all the talk about Doug not being able to have good coaches or coaches or bringing coaches is going to be questioned. So that's why I stay neutral here. I'm just telling you, would it surprise me or shock me if Doug succeeds elsewhere and it makes Jeffrey look bad? I guess that wouldn't surprise me at all. And I think time will tell on whether or not this decision was the right decision for the franchise. Jeffrey Lurie said it was.
Geoff Mosher, Football 4 from the Inside the Birds podcast. From all the people out there that think Roseman is the biggest problem and want him gone, does it sound to you at all that Roseman is in any sort of trouble or on any sort of thin ice?
I mean, it certainly doesn't sound like it. The owners seem to understand all of the mistakes that have happened, and he seemed to vouch for Howie and the people in the building who he said were great people. So if he were to make a move, it would be somewhat surprising, but I also know that Jeffrey plays things close to the vest. I don't say anything is concrete ever with it. You guys know I say that about the Eagles all the time. Nothing surprises me with them. I don't think Howie's going to get fired, but maybe there is some move made within the personnel department that change the hierarchy. But that's kind of been done before, and Howie was still in the background anyway. So I'm not sure having more instability is a good thing for this franchise. I'm a big believer either you cut the cord and start over with the right people, or you don't. You don't kind of try to halfway, go through it. You either commit or don't commit. So we'll have to see what Jeffrey Lurie does going forward.
All right. So much to kind of peel back here because obviously – and then Lurie made the comment about he didn't seem all that worried about being in salary cap, with the salary cap situation they're in. He kind of said, that's comes and goes. Like it didn't seem like that's something that he was all that worried about.
Yeah, he called it a one-year phenomenon.
Yep.
That's fair. I mean, I think this coming year is going to be difficult for the Eagles because they'll have to make a lot of moves just to be cap compliant. They're not going to be able to be very far under the cap. I can't see that happening to where they can bring in a guy like they did with Hargrave or Darius last year. We'll see, but I can't see that happening. But certainly by 2022, I think that they'll probably be in pretty good shape because they've generally been good with the salary cap. So that's what I believe he meant by a one-year phenomenon. But the point is that one-year phenomenon starts now, and you're looking for a head coach to walk into it, and you can't tell your head coach, we want to win now, but then also give them a set of circumstances that is untenable.
Finally, one of the things Lurie said, look, what's your role been? Well, it's been the same for the last 25 years. It sounds as if recently it all of a sudden it sounds like Lurie's had a lot more meddling. So when he says, my role's been the same, I ask a lot of questions. Do you think that's accurate?
No, I mean, from what I've been told, and this goes back more than just a year, that Jeffrey has been a lot more involved in the organization. And, from a lot of decision making, and clearly it was, he's got a different plan for the future of the team than the head coach did. So that tells you right there that he's got more than just question asking going on. He has his own vision that people need to meet. So my philosophy is, you're an owner, you need to hire the right people from at the top of your organization to bring in people so that you don't have to make decisions on assistant coaches getting hired and fired. That's me. That's me personally. I think the best organizations have owners who do that. Of course, owners can settle ties, but at the end of the day, they've got to be confident that their people are bringing in the right people. And if they're not, then they get new people. I just don't think it's a good idea for an owner to be as heavily involved with personnel or coaches coming and going as Jeffrey is.
All right, there you go. Football 4, and obviously we ran a little late here today because of the Lurie presser. So much to kind of go to look back on, and we will continue to do so. Go to 97.3ESPN.com for more reaction.